In this video with Dr. Mike Israetel, we will discuss rigid meal plans versus flexible dieting lifestyle, next to a bunch of other related topics on nutrition, healthy eating, eating for being healthy versus eating for muscle hypertrophy versus eating for endurance sports. Let's get right into it. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe so you can learn more about fitness and nutrition, hormones and anti-aging, all this to optimize your life overall. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss anything. So let's talk today about rigid meal plans versus flexible dieting lifestyle. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of both, and what type of athlete is one of those most suited for? What's your opinion, Mike?
Yeah, so I think we can actually see this as a spectrum of rigidity to flexibility. And, there's something that can be termed as an incredibly rigid meal plan, maybe the most possible rigid meal plan, all the way to what can be termed as, completely intuitive eating, in which you just eat whatever you want, right? And it's a big spectrum. And at every point in between, there are opportunities to increase or decrease the structure of the meal plan. And the kinds of individuals that respond best to one side of spectrums or the other tend to be different. And so there's a couple of things to say. First of all, for many people who are interested in having a healthy relationship with food and interested in establishing good nutritional patterns, not just to lose a little weight in the short term, but to be able to learn how to eat for health and fitness for a long time, what you can do is you can take a client and start them at the very far end of close to intuitive eating or wherever they eat, just whatever they want, and to very slowly walk them to structure by teaching them very, very basics. So, for example, you can start with just having them learn to identify more healthy foods and less healthy foods. For example, that means that they can start to choose foods that are more likely to be lean meats or lean proteins, veggies, fruits, whole grains, and healthy fats like olive oil, canola oil, avocados, nuts. And, telling them to eat most of their foods as healthy foods is not a whole lot of structure. You're not even giving them macros or food amounts. But if you tell somebody who's really invested in long-term health, so, I think 3 out of the 4 meals of your day should be from healthy food choices. That is some structure, probably more than they're used to. Not very tough to do, but a little bit of a challenge. After several weeks or sometimes even several months of just doing that, especially if they start out quite unhealthy and quite over fat, just choosing healthier foods makes people lose a lot of weight and get into better shape, right? Because a lot of times people who are very bad shape, man, the only way to stay there, continue to weigh 150 kilos, is to eat mostly junk food because it's so energy dense and it's so palatable and it's so easy to eat. If you start eating mostly lean meats, fruits, veggies, whole grains, and healthy fats, you just run out of time and run out of a desire to eat that much food. As you well know, bodybuilders try to bulk up eating foods mostly like that, and bulking is hard, right? It's hard work to eat all that stuff. So if you get someone to switch to that, after a few weeks or maybe longer, 2 things happen. 1, they start to get pretty good results already. And 2, they're quite used to selecting healthy foods. Like, they know where to buy them at the store. They know what's cheap and what's not. They have their favorites. They know how to spot foods that are more healthy than not if they go out to eat and make those choices. So they're really just used to doing it. So that process becomes more automatic. And that automation, that sort of autopilot view, is very important, especially for people who are doing this for a lifetime, because you can't have your mental bandwidth all be taken up by dieting all the time, right? You have a real job, kids, family, etc. So all the stuff has to eventually be automatized. And as soon as it becomes automatized, you can go on and get the next big thing. So the next thing you can do is say, okay, now that you are eating healthy foods, what we're going to do is try to get you to construct a typical plate, so that when you eat, anytime you eat, I want you to eat a meal, and you teach them how to construct a meal. Now that's more rigid because, for example, just eating healthy means you can have a handful of nuts or an apple or 2 and check I'm eating healthy. That's great. And then 30 minutes later, you can have another handful of nuts, another apple or two, and it's good. When you take the next step and teach them how to construct healthy meals, you say, okay, every meal you eat, most meals you eat, should be core lean protein, maybe the size of your fist or your hand, but they already know what a lean protein is, so that's easy, right? And then veggies and or fruits, maybe whole grains if you're hungry or need more energy. And if you're hungry, need more energy, some extra healthy fats on the side. Every meal should look something like that. Chicken breast, rice, and broccoli. You have fish, asparagus, and so on and so forth. There's 100,000 different meals they can make. And at first, it's going to be challenging for them to no longer just eat whenever they want, but to construct meals / snacks that fit that mold of everything is based around a lean protein and veggies, and then sometimes we add fruits, grains, and healthy fats as needed. But once they get used to doing that, they're going to be able to literally just have these meals. They know how to eat healthy meals, and because they have to eat meals, their eating becomes more regular and more structured, which we know from research usually just makes people lose weight anyway and become healthier anyway in a bunch of different ways, because snacking doesn't have sort of the best track record in the literature. It's a great way to get in extra calories. So now that they have these sort of meals, most people will automatically fall into a meal pattern that fits them. And again, you can counsel them and say, okay, how many meals a day do you think you can fit in? And they say, I can fit in 3 meals and a snack. And it's a working relationship you have with people. And eventually, a couple weeks later, they're making and eating regular, healthy, balanced meals, which is amazing. And because the only thing they had to learn over those 2 weeks is how to make the meals, they already knew what healthy food was. It's not that hard. Imagine teaching them what healthy food is and how to make meals at the same time. You're going to lose a lot of people. These are busy professionals. Like, imagine some of your doctor colleagues trying to learn all this at the same time while still being, doing the work. This is tough stuff, right? It requires complete change. So once they learn how to do that, what you can do after that is set a bit of a rigidity and expectation to their meal timing and potentially even the meal amounts. Sometimes we split these 2 steps up. It doesn't matter exactly how you do this. They already know how to eat healthy. They already know how to build healthy meals. The next step, over the next several weeks, they get used to eating meals at approximate times. You say, I want you to eat a breakfast when you wake up or within an hour. I want you to eat a lunch. I want you to eat dinner. I want you to have a healthy snack. And I want you to look at the portion sizes and make them fit about this portion size or something like that. Once they have the timing down pretty consistently and they have the portion size relatively consistently, you can take them to the next level if you want. Now, here's the thing. For 90% of your clients that are just regular people who want to lose fat and build muscle, you can straight up stop right there. They already have lost a bunch of weight. They're already super healthy. They can just eat like that the rest of their lives and never bother counting a single thing more than they already are. But some people are going to want to lose more weight or build muscle, have more specific goals. For them, now that they have a rigidity to their meal structure, you can teach them how to count macros or portion sizes, whether that's in grams of meat or in grams of protein. It doesn't matter. You could do both. Shameless plug, the RP Diet app counts both. So you can flip back and forth and count either one. And there's a bunch of other macro trackers they can use. So now all of a sudden, they put numbers to what they're eating. The thing is, if you push the numbers first, it can be real confusing because people who don't know what a healthy food is, okay, get 200 grams of protein a day. They might be like, what the hell is what's a protein? I've literally had people say, so what's like protein? I'm like, oh my God. Like, this is back when I didn't know as much. They're like, is pretzels protein? You're like, oh boy, right? So you kind of did it backwards. But these people won't ask that question because they'll know exactly what a protein is. You say like, we've been eating a fistful of steak. They're like, that's 200 grams of steak. And I want you to put it on a scale and you're going to get about 200 grams plus or minus 5. Does that sound okay? And they're like, okay, but what do I do with my meals? Like, the same meals. I just want you to start measuring. After a couple of weeks, the measuring is super easy. They can even eyeball half the stuff. And they know how to measure. So let's take a tally of what they have. They know how to eat healthy. They know when to eat they know how to build a meal. They have exact times for when they eat their meals or rough times. And they know how to track. Now you tell them, okay, let's cut 50 grams of carbs from each meal, or let's add 20 grams of fat, or whatever it is to make your manipulations scientifically to make them lose fat, gain muscle, or whatever. But now they're the perfect client because they know exactly what that means. They're like, okay, so each meal I just cut 50 grams of carbs. Like, yep. They're like, okay. So they just take the rice, they go like that, and then that's it, right? And all of a sudden, they moved from one side of the spectrum to a very rigid side, the loose to rigid, but the entire time you went with them slowly and made sure they got used to it the entire time. Now that they're on the rigid side of the spectrum, they can operate more like machines and get machine-like results and get super ripped, super lean, whatever they want. That process has a tendency to fatigue people. Always measuring, always counting, always tracking. So when they're doing their fat loss phases or their muscle gain phases, you're going to ask them to be rigid and count and track everything and make exact macro guidelines. Once they go into maintenance mode every now and again, what you want to do is relax that structure a little bit. So you might have them do exact macros for 2 weeks of maintenance at first. And then after that, shift them back one, or you just say, hey, just go back to healthy meals of approximately the sizes we used to do. And they're like, I don't have to count anything. Let's take a break from counting. The thing is, making healthy meals of an approximate size is so easy for them at this point. It's so ingrained. It's going to take almost no mental bandwidth. They can really relax from tracking. And then when they want to do a hardcore fat loss or muscle gain phase again in a couple of months, back to tracking, and it's no problem because it's just one ingredient added. So that's how I would say you can do that whole spectrum run. And so people ask, should beginners track? Yes, but they should be eased into tracking. Should advanced people not track when they're just maintaining? Absolutely not, because they have such great habits. But listen, I'm getting ready for a bodybuilding show. I'm going to measure my stuff, man. I don't want to eyeball stuff because you get a little hungrier, your portions get a little bigger. All of a sudden, you don't know why your results are happening. So when you need specific, very, very good results, you track. When you're relaxing, you back off a little bit, but all of that it's best when it's accompanied with a lead in to healthy habit and meal design formations. And this is something that if folks are interested in hearing more about this, the Renaissance Diet 2.0, which is a book I co-authored with the other RP colleagues, has an entire section of a chapter on this entire diet onboarding process. And I used to, when I taught university courses in health behavior, we actually have a similar process for working out that I could talk about another time. But this is something that works really, really well. The downside is that it's a bit of a long-term investment. So sometimes when you have clients that just want results now, you might have to push them a little faster on that little escalator, or just start with tracking. The downside is that, we lose clients. Not everyone succeeds. And when you're helping diet clients, sometimes they fall off the wagon and like, oh, tracking's too hard, or I'm too busy, blah, blah, blah. Usually a big reason why you lose them is they weren't ready for tracking. They might have only been ready for learning how to eat healthy. Some people within one day can go in that whole escalator, do a great cutting diet, and they're super golden. Some people, they'll need months to go on that escalator, and some even can't go on it at all. So if you want to rush the process, you can, but it's going to come with some risks of people not being able to hang on and eventually dropping off. Hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Thank you. And about healthy eating, could you explain a bit about the main differences to healthy eating to be as healthy as possible versus eating to become as jacked as possible versus third one for endurance sports? Because I get that question a lot as well.
Totally. That's a very great answer. Actually, it segues exactly off of the last discussion that we just had. So, everyone starts off in this process I just described with learning how to eat healthy. But some of these people might, of course, everyone says they're interested in health, and they are to some extent. Most people really are just interested in abs, or if they're endurance athletes, interested in running faster or cycling faster, or getting more jacked or what have you. Healthy eating is at the core of all of those, but the amounts of food you're eating, the macro ratios, and sometimes the quality of the food, the composition, can be a little bit different, right? So a big difference in eating for health. So for eating for health is very straightforward. What you want is to have the bare minimum of proteins, carbs, and fats each to meet your needs, which is actually very small. It's like 10% of your calories from each one. And then all the other calories can come from whatever you like. So if you like eating mostly carbs, just a bit of fats and proteins, totally fine. Mostly fats and proteins, a little bit of carbs, totally fine. And everything in between is totally fine too. The composition of your food matters a little bit more for health than we usually think. So the food composition is, where are your proteins coming from? Are lean meats really better than, some kind of like fatty meats or processed meats? Yes, probably. Are monounsaturated fats better than saturated fats for most people at most concentrations? Yes, probably. So eating sticks of butter is not as healthy as eating, peanut butter or eating almonds or something like that. If you ever want to see the literature on the health and enhancing effects of nuts, it's unbelievable. There's just like nuts, and there's like thousands of articles about how everything you do when you eat more nuts, your whole body becomes healthier. It's really pretty impressive. If you want a superfood, look no further. Just for some reason, nobody ever says it. It's not fancy enough, so you've got to go with goji berries or some crap like that, so you can sell it on your Instagram. But and then the carb source does matter for health. You want things high in fiber, phytochemicals, and vitamins and minerals, and mostly that's fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So can you eat processed grains and Gatorade and powders? You can, but that's not going to be as healthy for you, even within the constraint of calories. And here's the biggest difference between healthy eating and the others. The others might still ground you in the healthy foods, and they might require you to eat more protein or less fat or whatever, which is all okay because that's all healthy. It's the calories that are different. Gaining muscle requires a hypercaloric diet. In general, past a certain point, gaining weight is not ideal for your health. You want to be as healthy as possible. The most important thing you can do is eat the number of calories it takes to keep you within a healthy weight range. Now, that range is a lot bigger than most people think, but it still has limits. For example, at my height, anything much over 190 pounds, even if I'm lean, is not ideally healthy. I'll put it to you in another way. If I was 210 pounds lean versus if I was just as lean at 170 pounds, my blood work, etc., and performance of my cardiovascular system, all of the markers and predictors of long-term health would be better at 170 pounds than at 210 pounds, even if I'm the same level of leanness. And someone would say, like, but Jesus, that's like you're saying 30 pounds of muscle is making you less healthy? Absolutely, because it's extra tissue. It requires the heart to work extra, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not so much the eating of bodybuilding that makes you unhealthy. It is where are you going with that eating. If you are eating bodybuilding style and you're on a fat loss phase and you're losing weight, bodybuilding eating and healthy eating look very, very similar. If you're gaining weight, the fundamentals of the eating is the same. You could be gaining weight on all whole grains and avocados and everything, but a hypercaloric diet is usually not contingent or not concordant with best health outcome. For endurance athletics, healthy eating and performance eating are very similar, but endurance athletes have to understand that in order for them to maintain their healthy/competitive body weight, they have to eat a lot more food than most people who don't train that much. Should most of that food come from healthy sources? Yes. So it'll look a lot like an endurance athlete's plate is going to look a lot like a healthy person's plate that doesn't do endurance athletics. It's just going to be bigger. And sometimes people get sort of really impressed at how much endurance athletes eat. And then they ask them, is that healthy? It is, because they do so much physical activity. So for example, an endurance athlete might go out to a restaurant. They might have a salad to begin the meal, and they might have a piece of fish or something. And they might have like 3 bowls of pasta with a red sauce. You think, oh my God, like you see endurance athletes eat and you're like, where does it all go? How is this possible? You weigh 70 kilos. Where is it going? And the answer is it's going to replenish energy stores from the 10-kilometer run they do twice daily or something like that. If a regular person ate, and so regular people look at that and they go, well, the only reason they can eat that is as an endurance athlete. Well, the food is still the same high quality food. It's still healthy food. It is correct that it is so much food that most people would become unhealthy eating it, but that's only because they don't expend as much energy. So endurance eating is largely based on the same foods, but it's just more food, specifically more carbohydrate. And again, there's nothing wrong with eating a lot of carbohydrate, even if you're just a healthy person and you're not an endurance athlete. As a percent of your diet, your carbs can be just as high as an endurance athlete. But as far as the total number of calories, that's where the split happens. So for bodybuilding, it's actually very similar. Most bodybuilders should be eating in a way that looks very healthy. It's just more. And for bodybuilders, it's almost certainly more carbs. It can be much more protein. It can even be more fat. Still all healthy sources, still in the kind of balance that is fine for health, just more food. Now, the thing is, because bodybuilders gain weight, it's worse for their health than endurance athletes who eat a lot of food to propel their endurance activity. That being said, very strenuous exercise and a high throughput of eating wears out your cellular structures faster. So endurance athletes at a high level actually can have not ideally long lifespans, right? They actually die a little sooner, but their abilities and health during the time that they're alive are very high. So it ends up being that you can say that endurance athletics is excellent for your health, but not ideal for your longevity, although it's very good. And with bodybuilding, it's much the same. When you're bodybuilding, you're super healthy, but you just won't live as long because you're going to run out of basically, for lack of a better term, life force, right? Your mitochondrial repair and telomerase issues with your DNA. You just run the machine, you burn the candle faster, you burn it for less long. But both lifestyles can be super healthy while you're living them. But from a longevity, which is a part of health perspective, eating less and doing moderate amounts of physical activity and never weighing much, which bodybuilders and endurance athletes to some extent violate one or two of those, that's the way to the best health and longevity. So the fundamentals are the same. It's the calories and the activity that tend to be different.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. And should there be a different number of meals or diet structure between the different components there? Hypertrophy versus healthy versus endurance?
Yeah, so I think that meal timing is much more important to hypertrophy and endurance athletes than it is towards people just interested in health. As a matter of fact, if you're just interested in health, you can eat as few as one meal per day, potentially even just one meal every other day, and be essentially pretty close to ideal health. As long as you hit your macro minima, get all the nutritious foods you need, and get enough calories. For bodybuilding, that doesn't work very well, and it sure as heck doesn't work well for endurance sport. So for them, a serious bodybuilder, a serious endurance athlete, pretty much operates at a minimum of 4 meals per day, in my opinion, as a practitioner, researcher, etc. If you're trying to eat 3 times a day and you're trying to compete in high-level bodybuilding or endurance sport, you're almost certainly missing out. Let me explain why. For bodybuilding, it seems that the body can benefit from at least 4 pulses of amino acids throughout the day to enhance hypertrophy. And if it doesn't get those, it might go through missing out on muscle growth and actually potentially lose a little bit of muscle. Secondly, for endurance sport, replenishing lost stores and fueling up for future training is very important. So sometimes endurance athletes that are at a high level, by sometimes I mean often, will train twice a day or more. 3 meals a day is a very, very tough to replenish and properly energize twice a day training. Let me give just the most basic example. Let's say you train in the morning and you train in the late afternoon, which is a good spread because it gives you plenty of time to recover. You're probably not going to wake up and go train right away because you need energy to fuel your training. Fasted workouts are adorable when bodybuilders talk about them because we don't train that hard. Endurance athletics is very difficult, and almost no one in endurance athletics does fasted workouts because you would just die halfway through. So you have to eat meal number 1 before you go train. A lot of times during training, you're going to want to fuel the body anyway, hydration and carbohydrate and protein. But let's just pretend that even that doesn't happen. It does, but that's a whole other issue. After first AM training, you're going to want to replenish as soon as possible because you want to replete glycogen stores to begin recovery for your next session to be super productive. There's a trade-off there. If you eat a huge amount of food, you can replenish, but then you need a long time in order for that food to settle in your stomach and to replenish glycogen stores and so on and so forth. And by the time you're fully digested with all that food, you might be in a position where your blood sugar could be higher if you ate food right before in order to fuel you for this next run. So if you choose to just eat 1 meal after training, wait a long time, and then train a second time, you might have benefited from another meal there. What about after you come back from your second training? Well, you could eat one gigantic meal and refuel for the training that you have afterwards for the next day. But that means you're going to be basically starving to death in the evening because you've just had one meal after training. And there's only so much food you can eat in one sitting, where you might find the need to optimize to eat another meal before you go to sleep to help you sleep and help you recover, so on and so forth. So if you really want to push endurance training hard, you can do it with 3 meals a day, but you're really fiddling with a lot of pluses and minuses there, and it's not going to be ideal. Almost no endurance athletes at a high level eat 3 times a day. Almost all of them eat at least 4 times a day, and often much more. And if you count intra-training eating, they're always kind of eating. A lot of endurance athletes eat like 9 times a day if you really count it out, because they snack all the time. Because the amount of carbohydrate that it takes to replenish true high-level endurance athletics is an amount that scares people who weigh 65 kilos. And that's how much these guys weigh. If you weigh 65 kilos and you have to eat 800 grams of carbohydrate a day, you just don't do that in 3 meals, because then you either will be too sick to run or to cycle or to swim, or way too full after eating highly uncomfortable and for no good reason. So a lot of endurance athletes end up splitting up their meals. Whereas if you don't have that kind of energy demand, you can eat 3 times, 2 times, or even 1 time a day and be totally fine. Unfortunately, fueling for training and recomping from training is forgotten by some athletes, and they get into the fads of intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding, popular in martial arts, where some people are into the ideas of time-restricted feeding, and they have popularized it in martial arts and MMA and jiu-jitsu. And a lot of times, the people that popularize it, they're not high-level competitive athletes. They're people that maybe used to be more competitive and now are just recreational, or the recreational to begin with. And like a typical guy at a jiu-jitsu class will be a guy who works at a regular job and then jiu-jitsu like 4 times a week. And he might have been competitive in the past, and he's a black belt now, and he just has a family. And because he's a black belt, people listen to him as well as they should. But he says he does time-restricted feeding, and it works really well for him. The thing is, he only trains 4 times a week. He didn't get good training 4 times a week. He got good training 7 times a week. But now he's just coasting along and getting better slowly. If you talk to a professional mixed martial artist, you ask them how many times do you eat, they say, well, I train 3 times a day, so I kind of eat all the time. And if you try to get them to do time-restricted feeding, either their performance in some sessions or their recovery for others is going to suffer significantly. And sometimes people think, what's good for longevity and what's good for health is going to be good for me as a mixed martial artist or jiu-jitsu practitioner. There's just no reason to believe that that's the case. What's also good for longevity is not getting hit in the face all the goddamn time, but I guess they missed that memo. So it's one of those situations where, meal timing is a real big difference, and you can eat very, very small meal timing, or eat 9 meals or eat 1 meal a day, and you'll be the same health as long as calories, et cetera, are equated. But for performance, at least 4 meals a day, and often as many as 7 meals are required for optimal performance. I'll put it to you this way. Competitive cyclists in the Tour de France, have you ever seen their eating schedules that they do? It's obscene. It's obscene, right? There's talks of some days being 1,500 grams of carbs. They eat every conceivable moment that they're able to eat, because if they don't eat when they're able to, they won't get in enough food, and they'll just crash and burn right through the race. And say, oh, well, that's just a race. Some guys train so hard that it's almost like a mini Tour de France 4 out of 5 days of their training week. You got to eat seriously for that. You can't just eat like a regular person.
Yeah, I never understood how those guys do that. They're on the bike the whole day. They still have to sleep in the hours that are left and eat as well. So
Yep.
I have
A lot of times they eat on the bike. They'll have like cookies and gels on the bike while pedaling. It's madness. That's a different. We all think we're tough in the lifting community. Nah, like those are real tough people. Like I'm scared of those guys.
Okay. One more question. Should the way of eating change as we get older? I have a lot of friends 40 plus, and should the way of eating change for maybe more and more for longevity or healthy eating when we get older?
That's an interesting question. Technically speaking, not really, because longevity is built based on what you do through your entire lifespan. So if you eat like shit for the first 30 years of your life, that all adds up to making you live less time later. That being said, there's a degree of resiliency that your blood work and your organ systems have when you're younger that they no longer have as much of when you're older. So, for lack of a better term, you can get away with a little bit more bullshit when you're younger, and not as much when you're older. Especially in an acute sense. For example, you used to be able to eat a whole pizza by yourself, but now a whole pizza causes you heartburn because you're older. So maybe you don't eat whole pizzas just because it causes you heartburn. Not that they were ever healthy to begin with, it's just you didn't pay at least an immediate price for them. In addition to that, older people may have some conditions or the development of some conditions that now eating just how they want is no longer an option. Pre-diabetes, for example, might mean that you might need to eat differently than you used to. Older people may benefit from a higher protein diet, but then again, younger people do as well if they resistance train. Older people benefit from resistance training categorically more than young people do, in the sense that if you take a young person and they don't resistance train, what is their health and longevity and quality of life like? Well, man, it's fine. You know, so for example, take somebody, well, you're in Europe, this is a perfect example. Go to the Love Parade in Berlin. Are you familiar with the Love Parade?
I am.
Excellent, of course. Mandatory European understanding. So Love Parade in Berlin, take your average 22-year-old on ecstasy and like 3 bottles of champagne. That person has a pretty low body fat. If you run their blood work, other than the fact that they're on ecstasy, they're going to be very healthy. And it's just because they're fucking 22 years old. You know, you look at 22 years old and you're like, God damn it to be young again. You know, they can fucking put garbage into their bodies. Nothing happens. If you tell a 22-year-old after they wake up the next day at the Love Parade, like over a fire hydrant, they sort of wake up like, holy shit, that was awesome. You can say, hey, listen, you know, if you lift weights and you eat healthy, you're going to feel a lot better. That's actually not true. If they start lifting weights and they start eating healthy, they're going to feel a little bit better, but they're mostly going to feel the same. They're just going to build muscle and lose fat and start to look a lot cooler, but they look fine anyway. You know, like a lot of kids just have abs because they're 22 and the girls just have excellent shape just because they're fucking 22. So if you tell young people, hey, listen, training and healthy diet is really going to make a difference, it's just not, right? However, imagine a 55-year-old who doesn't train, eats like crap, very low physical activity. Their blood work's going to be not great. The doctor's going to be having those kinds of conversations with them like, you know, you can keep doing this, but you got a wife and kids and you want grandkids, you want to see them. This isn't great. And they're going to feel a certain way, like they're not going to have the vitality of their youth anymore. They're going to be more tired, so on and so forth. If you have them resistance train, if you have them eat a higher protein diet, if you have them follow all the same healthy dieting principles that you basically would give a young person, they're going to feel like they're 22 again. And they're going to continue to feel like that for decades. It's going to make such a difference. I mean, I'm sure, you know, you travel around and you're in your 40s, correct?
Yes, 45.
So, you know, you're on a plane and there's 45-year-olds that struggle to put their bags up into the baggage compartment. You could probably, as a joke, put everyone's bags up and not even break a sweat. And they look at you and they think, oh, this guy, oh, well, you know, they try to look for something special, some kind of excuse to, and they're like, well, you must be young. And you're like, I'm 45. And they're like, fuck, I'm 44. And I look and feel like shit. That's because you invest in your body and they don't. But if you compare a 22-year-old who trains and eats healthy to a 22-year-old that doesn't, a lot of the times you can't even tell them apart. You know, some genetics can cover that base pretty well. So to sort of come around to the big answer is there a real big difference between how younger and older people should be eating healthy? Not really. Not really. Who's going to feel it the most? For older people, it'll be night and day. For younger people, it's a difference, but it might not be a very big difference. So when I used to teach, again, health behavior, same course at the university, I taught to exclusively 18 to 22-year-olds. So I had to tell them, look, is it going to matter to you? Are you going to feel different if you do all this stuff? I'm here to tell you that you're probably not. And all of a sudden, they're like, wow, okay, that actually makes sense. Because, you know, every other one of their classes, they're like, you're killing yourself, all this alcohol. You know, binge drinking is very common at American universities. You drink a crap load 3 nights a week and almost die, and you go back. The thing is, the next day they feel like crap. A day after that, they feel fine, and they are fine, and their blood work's fine, and everything's okay. So they don't actually pay the price for that right away. They're slowly degrading their systems, of course. But if you tell people, hey, like, young people, it applies to you as well, you're basically lying to them. So you can tell them, hey, look, right now, you're not going to feel the differences, although it all adds up. When you get older, you're going to start to feel it. Here's the thing, though. If you establish healthy habits when you're younger, you never actually feel like shit when you're older. And you have all those healthy habits like we were talking about earlier, you already one step ahead. You have kids now, you have a job, you have responsibilities, but because you've been eating healthy for so long and training, that's just a part of your life, and it's never very hard. People probably ask you, oh my God, you must take so much dedication. You're like, yeah, I guess. It's just something I do now. I don't even think about it much. But if you're older and you're 55 and the doctor has the first conversation with you, like, hey, what do you eat and how do you train? And you're like, I don't, and I have no idea what training is. Changing your life at that point is going to be very difficult. And you are going to get the benefits, but most people, they try and they fail because it's too big of a change for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great answer. And maybe piggybacking on that answer, Mike, a guy like me that has reached its genetic potential, should it be healthier to just maintain the same kind of diet and caloric maintenance, or should one still try to cut and bulk, or isn't that as healthy as it could be?
I think if you've truly reached your genetic muscularity, cutting and bulking is probably not a good idea. Because it puts your body through additional stresses, specifically to bulking, and for very little to no gains. I think that if you're interested in looking a certain way, pick the body weight you look the best at, or that you want the best trade-off of health and appearance. And you can do sort of a little bit of bulking where you maybe gain 5 kilos over 6 months and then lose 5 kilos, 5 kilos, but not 10 kilos, not 15 kilos. And just sort of stay around that same kind of body weight and make very slow changes and be super healthy. That is if you want to be very jacked. If you want optimal health, you should lose a considerable amount of body weight and be much smaller than you currently are. Now, you might not want to do that because fuck that, fuck being small. And that's okay, but it's a known trade-off. Like when I retire from bodybuilding, which will hopefully happen in, I don't know, about 5 or 7 years from now, I'm going to immediately drop like probably 15 kilos right away, at least. And then when I'm in my 40s, I'm going to weigh probably between 180 and 200 pounds. When I'm in my 50s, I actually plan on very likely dropping to between 180 and 160 pounds, because within a pretty large range, the lighter you are, the more your longevity is and the healthier you can be. Now, not everyone in their 50s is going to want to weigh 160 pounds. That's not for everyone. Some people are going to want to weigh 190, and they can be healthy. There's a bit of a longevity trade-off there, but it's totally possible. However, especially pushing hard bulks when you're older, not a very good idea.
Okay, thanks for that great answer. Okay, Mike, that concludes my questions for now. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, talk to you next time. Thanks.
All right. Very cool. Bye.